Fintech yani finansal teknolojiler, finansal hizmetlerin daha hızlı, daha iyi ve daha düşük maliyette sunulabilmesini sağlayan teknolojilerdir. Son yıllarda dijital dünyanın sunduğu yeni ve geniş olanakların devreye girmesiyle fintech uygulamalarının da kullanım alanları artmış ve finans sektörüne yön verecek noktalara gelmiştir. Bu alanlardan bir tanesi de günümüzde çokça tartışılan açık bankacılık. Birazdan Asya ve Avrupa'da açık bankacılığı konuşacağımız oturumun moderatörü Sistem Optima-Teknoloji Danışma Kurulu üyesi Dilek Duman'ı sahneye alırken çok değerli 3 konuşmacıyı da online olarak ekrana yansıtacağız. Islamic Bank Yönetim Kurulu üyesi Dr. Safa Nassereldin, Gift Forum Global Yönetim Kurulu Başkanı Malik Kotadia ve Systems Company for Consultancy yönetici ortağı Rami İdris, finansal teknolojilerin sektörü nasıl yönlendireceğini bizlere aktaracak. Sayın Duman, sizi sahneye davet ediyorum.
Nasıl oturmam?
Çünkü online olacağı için ısrar ederseniz.
Belki evet, şöyle geçsem. Merhaba. The session will be continuing in English. I have very valuable guests. Let me introduce myself first of all. I'm actually a very long period of history of a banking sector related to IT and operations. So this open banking session is really a changing way of banking. I'm really excited to discuss it with my valuable guests. So you can see them at the digital environment. I want to welcome them, and maybe first of all they can introduce themselves with a few words, and we can just discuss about how open banking will change our way of doing business, how we can succeed on that. So could you please, we can start with Dr. Safa. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning. First of all, it's a pleasure for me to participate in this event, Mobilefest. I'm speaking to you from Jerusalem, Palestine, and I am currently the Presidential Secretary General of Al-Quds University, and I am a board as the Islamic Bank and many other organizations where I am board member, like the Higher Council for Innovation and Excellence, the Palestine Education for Employment, and Internet Service Provider, in an investment company, in an incubator for energy, innovation fund. So I have a different kind of experience and participation in the Palestinian context and in the regional context also, related to enabling the youth and new innovations in Palestine.
Very nice to have you here,
Thank you.
Dr. Safa. Mr. Malik, can we continue with you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning, and a very warm thank you to you from Singapore and Southeast Asia. My name is Malik Kotadia, and it's my pleasure to be back in Istanbul, Turkey. Although this time I'm speaking virtually and I'm not able to attend there in person, but I have many, many happy and fond memories of Istanbul, which I consider as one of the greatest and most historic cities in the world. So I come with about 20 years of banking and digital finance experience from all over the world. About 14 years out of those were spent with Citibank, in which I worked in different roles, mainly in digital banking, digital marketing, digital transformation, and digital payments all over the world, and digital engagement. And I have been in this space well before the term fintech or open banking or any of these concepts existed, since the early 2000s. So I have been fortunate to see how this industry has evolved to a point now where digital finance and open banking are being discussed at all conferences all over the world. And I wear many hats now when it comes to the fintech space. I am a adjunct professor of fintech. I teach a full fintech course at several universities in Asia, Europe, and possibly in Africa pretty soon. I am also the co-founder and global board chairman of the Global Impact FinTech, or the GIFT Forum, which is the largest fintech think tank, non-profit think tank in the world. We have very high caliber members from 65 plus countries, and we are growing towards 100 countries strong by 2022 end. Our members are essentially top leaders from across the entire ecosystem of the fintech world, be they fintech company founders or blockchain founders or AI founders, but also several central bankers, regulators, people from multilateral agencies, including the Asian Development Bank, IFC, World Bank, etc. And we have quite a few of our members who are academics, like Dr. Safa, who, like me, are professors and who teach fintech at different universities in different parts of the world. So we have the advantage of having not just a global view, but a very, very balanced view of what's happening in the world of fintech, blockchain, open finance. And it will be my attempt today to share some of those perspectives with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malik. Yeah, we have a very valuable background here, so we will discuss in the coming part of the panel. Mr. Rami, can we introduce you?
Sure, thank you. This is Rami Idris. I'm the managing partner of systems company for Consultancy. I'm speaking from Amman, Jordan. First of all, it's my deep pleasure to be part of this event and this exhibit and this panel. I have more than 13 years experience in providing the consultancy, project management, and training programs for the digital financial services and the digital transformation for the institutions working in the digital financial services industry, and especially banks, as they are the leaders in this industry and in this business. We are working across MENA region, and we already, as I mentioned, provided our consultancy for the banks, not only in the digital financial services, but for the landscape of the electronic and the digital channels and the digital transformation strategy. And now we are arriving the era of digital transformation and open banking. So we are working deeply on this manner. And this is my introduction, and thank you. And again, it's my deep pleasure to be part of this session and to be present in this event in Istanbul, maybe remotely, but I hope soon will be physically. And thank you very much.
Yeah, this is a different way of doing this seminar, actually. You know, my on the stage physically, but you are on digital. So I believe the way is, the world is changing. So the name of the game is transformation, as you mentioned. So your transformation know-how is also very valuable. Because open banking is also a new kind of transformation. So I want to just start with Dr. Safa, because, okay, we all talk about open banking, but if this session is related to open banking, it may be a good idea from academic point of view. What is open banking? The technology is going pretty fast, so everything is connected. So why we are just discussing about open banking? What does it mean, please?
Yeah, thank you for this question, because it's really important to start by defining what is open banking, because I think in the audience there are some experts in this field, but they could be some people who don't know about it. I prepared 2 slides to speak about open banking, but unfortunately I cannot share. I don't know if you can allow me to share, or I can speak it up like this if you want. What do you prefer? Can I share the screen, or I should continue speaking?
Maybe you
about
can
open
continue
banking.
with speaking.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so related to open banking and definition, open banking is the financial service term as part of financial technology that refers to the use of open APIs that enable third-party developers to build applications and services around the financial institution. There's greater financial transparency option for account holders ranging from open data to private data, and the use of open source also technology to achieve the above. Open banking as a concept could be considered as a subspecies to open innovation concept, because we all speak about innovations and so on. So it's part of the open innovation concept, and it is linked to the shifts in attitudes towards the use of the issue of data ownership illustrated by regulations and concepts such as the open data movement, because there are lots of data around us. And when you have a bank account, the banks thinks that your data is, they own the data, but now with the shift, the consumer is the owner of the data. The banks turns into financial services platforms technically implemented through banking as a service now concept. So the concept of banking changed. Some terms I used earlier in the definition, like financial services, are the services provided by the finance industry that manage our money, like credit unions, banks, credit card companies, insurance companies, accountancy companies, consumer finance companies, stock investment funds, individual managers, and some government-sponsored enterprises. And speaking about financial technology, also the fintech, which is also for some people is a new expression. It is the technology and innovation that aims to compete with traditional financial methods in the delivery of financial services. So it is an emerging industry that uses technology to improve activities in finance. And the use of smartphones, for example, or mobile banking, investment, borrowing services, and cryptocurrency are examples of technologies that aim to make financial services more accessible to the general public. And there is the expression of APIs that I used earlier, which is an application programming interface that connects between computers or connects softwares together. It is a type of software interface offering a service to other pieces of software. So the term API may refer to either to the specification or to the implementation of the new technologies. So I will stop here to speak later about the new technologies that is used in open banking afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you gave an academic definition of open banking. The world is changing, and fintechs is trying to enable this open banking platform for the customers. But what about banks? I want to come to the Mr. Malik to discuss about, okay, what are the benefits for the banks, or do the banks has to support this open banking or just resist for that?
Thank you. And that is a very, very important and pertinent question, and a question I see being discussed not just in Turkey or not just in the MENA region, but almost everywhere in the world where there is discussion of open banking. There is this discussion of whether banks should jump into the bandwagon, or they naturally have a resistance to anything which is termed as open. So I'll give a couple of my perspectives. And before I kind of jump into why banks, I just want to build upon the excellent academic framework that Dr. Safa shared before us. And when we talk about open banking, it's really based on three open ideas or open principles, which will allow us to understand why banks think in a certain way. So it is about open data, as Dr. Safa said. It is about open architecture and open APIs or open API standards. And one of my friends is fond of calling APIs the language of love. Dr. Safa gave a very nice academic, a description of what APIs are about, how programs can talk. She likes to think of it as the language of love between banks and fintechs, if we really think of it that way. And then is, of course, open software or open, architecture. Now think about it. Banks have always thought of themselves as supermarkets when it comes to financial services, right? And I worked in a bank for a long time, so this was our guiding principle as well. Whatever the customer wants in financial services, whether deposit product, savings account, current account, loan, insurance, investments, mortgage, he or she should be able to get everything under a single roof. But what have we seen over the last 10 years, especially the last 6 or 7 years, with the rise of these various fintechs, changing customer behaviors, as well as the rise of cryptos and blockchain? I call them the 4 Fs. Basically, transactions are becoming faster, frictionless. We are seeing freemium or free along with some paid services, and fun. And it's important to really understand and internalize this, because when I teach fintech, I also tell my students to understand this very deeply. And now, wherever in the world we see payments, transactions are becoming almost real time or instant. Earlier, it used to take remittances, cross-border remittances would take 2, 3, 4 days and would cost a lot. Now it's becoming faster. Transactions are becoming frictionless, and we always give this example of, if we have to now take a ride-hailing company like Uber. I don't know what service is popular there in Turkey. I think it's Uber, but in my part of the world, Uber has largely exited. So it is Grab and Gojek, which are the 2 large ride-share companies. So let's say I book a Grab and I want to go from point A to point B. What happens, right? I book a car, it comes, I kind of track the progress on the app through the geo-positioning system, the Google Map Integrate API. And when my destination comes, I just open the door and walk out, right? There is no concept of payment happening at all, and which is a very big thing. I spent many, many years running payments businesses for Citi in multiple countries, and we were always trying to promote our payment services. But now for the first time, payments have become frictionless, right? You get in, you get out, payment happens at the back end. And I like to call it the 3 I's as well. Instant, invisible, intuitive, powered by intelligent technology. So we're talking about faster transactions, frictionless. Most transactions are either free or you pay a negligible cost. The costs have come down. And there is a fun or a gamification element, for the younger generation, for the millennials, money. We are seeing the rise of crypto tokens and meme coins, etc. They really think of money as something which is gamified, unlike our generation, which saw money as something very serious to be handled with care. So you see this changing user behavior on one hand. You see transactions becoming more and more real-time and instant and frictionless. And therefore, whether banks like it or not, they have to support open banking. And we are seeing this as a combination. I call it a combination of bottom-up and top-down. So bottom-up is where customer behavior, changing customer behavior, especially of the millennials, is forcing banks to offer better products and services. And let's accept it. They cannot offer all products and services. So we say the idea is changing from banks as a supermarket to banks as a marketplace. And that is where open APIs comes into the picture, right? The bank becomes like a utility in the middle, and all around it through APIs, you can have a lot of fintechs which can offer superior services in specific areas. So there can be a fintech which offers better payment services. There can be a fintech which offers robo-advisory and wealth management services through AI or machine learning technology. There can be fintechs which offer superior lending products. So the bank has a role to play, but the bank is now almost compelled to transition its business model from a supermarket to a marketplace where it works with multiple fintechs through open APIs and open banking, because 1, the customers demand it, and 2, we've seen regulations like these also in several places, especially starting with Europe with PSD and PSD2. So that's how I see the role of banks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Malik. As you mentioned, there is the customer at the center of everything. So there is a transformation to support this customer needs. So I want to come to Mr. Rami and asking the same question.
Sure. First of all, I would like to thank you, Dr. Safa, for the great and professional definition for the open banking and for the very valuable and insight information shared by Mr. Malik. Why banks should go for the open banking? I totally agree with Mr. Malik, and I would like to maybe to phrase it on more general or strategic level. for the banks. It's a fact that the open banking is a part and one of the end results for the digital transformation, as we said. So at certain level, it will be a mandatory for the banks to keep competing in their markets and to survive honestly. So this is one of the major points and very important points why open banking, to keep competing and to be able to survive in the market, because this is the new era and this is how it will be presented. On the other hand, there is huge benefits for the banks to adopt the open banking, which will help the banks to do their business in a more better and efficient operating module inside the bank, and will reduce the time to market for any new service and will make the decision faster and more efficient for their customers. They will modify the customer journey and make it more personalized on more segment levels, which is the most important right now. Since we are talking about a generation usually prefer to do their transactions, even it's financial or non-financial transaction, by a digital channel with a very faster and more convenient. On the other hand, open banking will allow the bank to retain their customers and expand their share market. Also by providing a new and more better and integrated and comprehensive services and transaction portfolio for their customers. As an end result for all of these factors on the internal and external level of the banks using the open banking, we will find that on the long term, the bank will do some sort of cost reduction, at least due to the difference between the cost of the transaction to be done on premises or through ATM, comparing to a digital transaction. It's the cost is almost maybe 10% and maybe less. On the other hand, open banking to third party and fintech service providers will allow the bank to generate a new revenue streams could not access on the traditional way or the current way business doing their business right now. And the last 2 points, the most important points, to be honest with you, for the banks to reduce the cost and to generate a more revenue, which make you most profitability, having a good share market, good competition rule. I believe this is the points where banks should adopt the digital transformation as soon as possible on the innovative level, not only to be following some innovative leaders in the market. You need to go to open banking as soon as possible. Thank you, and back to you, Dilek.
Thank you, Mr. Rami. Actually, as you all mentioned, the world is changing. Everything is digital and customer is demanding more. In order to banks to be survive in the market, they have to support open banking as soon as possible, as I understand from your answers. So also the innovation is coming with the help of this open banking. It's not just the banks, the fintechs is also bringing new innovative ideas. So for keeping the customer with the banks, banks has to benefit from this innovation ideas with the help of open banking. It's also a very, very important topic I wanted to underline from your answers. So, okay, banks has to support open banking, fintechs already do it. What about the technology, our current technology? Is it supporting this open banking environment, Dr. Safa?
Yes, dear Derek. The new technologies is really supporting the open banking, but we see a big difference in different countries all around the world. And this is due also not only to technologies, but also to regulations. But from a technical point of view, open banking, as we defined it earlier, it's a value-adding business model that uses open APIs to generate new revenue streams. So the customer is changing his behavior. There are increasing networking among banks. So banks before they were separate entities, but now there are more networking among banks themselves. There's the rise of ecosystem and the emergence of new supporting API technologies, and the spread of the APIs with the regulatory requirements, of course, and the standardization initiatives that are in some countries. It will help the presence of a central third-party providers regulatory body. And this, instead of having complex interfaces, easy to understand and technically designed APIs provide easy access for a variety of providers and partners, while API management systems also ensure easy setup, scalability, configuration, and analysis of the links. And the banks unfortunately are still in the construction phase of this type of systems, but the industry-specific requirements for safety and functionality, especially with the introduction of the regulations in the UK and in other countries, it still poses some major challenges. But open banking is still trying to spark competition and innovation in the financial service sector to create better products and experiences for the businesses and the consumers. So the banks, as my colleagues here said earlier, there are lots of new technologies. There are lots of open APIs that the banks can use, and not only the banks, because here we are not only speaking about banks. When you speak about open banking, we are speaking about the industry itself and the different kind of financial institutions that use the accounts and money transfer, and the new opportunities for banks and other financial institutions. And I'm speaking about the payments that have been accelerated and simplified with, for example, the electronic billing, the contactless payments like Apple Pay and Google Pay, and also the chatbots and the robo-advisory services that offer new levels of consultancy and support. And there are also, because when we used to apply for a loan, there was lengthy and unpleasant procedures, but now they are handled much faster with new features such as the digital identity and the video onboarding, the verification and the authentication that reduce times and efforts. And there are increasing competitive pressures that are setting new standards for the financial experience that cannot, and those who cannot deliver will fall behind. So the wholesale disruption of the financial market is already in full swing, and similar to that previously seen the sector as the media industry also. So as I said earlier, banks and all the financial institutions should make use of these new technologies, new open APIs, in order to advance their work and open up to the fintech and the other financial services.
Okay, thank you. As you mentioned, there is a lot of legacy for the banks coming, and the technology is going pretty fast, but the banks has to catch this gap. But from technological point of view, there are a lot of APIs, connection points, so the banks can just connect with them. I believe they are also putting a lot of effort to achieve this target. So bank sector is actually has a huge regulation on themselves. From regulation point of view, what is the current status actually for open banking? Mr. Rami, could you please comment on that?
Of course. Thank you. For the regulations, let's first agree that we need to take into consideration the difference between and the variance between the regions in the world. The case in Europe, it's different from the Far East, from MENA region. I will speak about MENA region, to be honest with you. The regulators, which is mainly in this region, is the central banks. If we have like a general question, do they support the regulations for the open banking? As a main question, my answer will be the regulators do not provide yet the needed support and regulations for the open banking. But I believe they will provide as soon as possible, because, as I mentioned maybe previously, the open banking will support the financial inclusion and will increase the number of the segment dealing with the electronic financial sector, which is one of the main targets of the regulators and the central bank in our region. But to be honest, what I see right now, the major problem that the regulators do not have a generic and uniform, let's say, framework for the regulations for the open banking. But yet they have some sort of different and random initiative on the level of the regulations to help the banks to convert to the open banking, like regulating the digital onboarding, maybe the regulating how to use the data of your consumer, of the customer, the privacy of the data. So what the regulators do is provide some sort of random initiatives, but I think they need to quickly do some sort of clear framework for the banks, regulations dedicated for the open banking, for the API, to take into consideration during the regulations how to regulate the third party and the fintech institutions, which is one of the major stakeholders, in this process. It's coming, but again, due to the difference between the countries and the regions, I think it will take time, maybe in the MENA region. So the regulators will provide the needed support for the banks on the term of suitable and taking into consideration the market givens, regulations to help the bank to convert to the open banking and to push the banks to go to the open banking in the right way and the more suitable way to match the country region. Thank you, Dilek.
Thank you. Yeah. As you mentioned, regulator is another part of this area. So, Mr. Malik, could you also suggest any idea how regulators can help the banks? What's going on in your location, please?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Dilek. Again, a very important aspect of open banking is the regulator's perspective. And Rami gave us some very good perspective from the MENA region. So I'll share something from South Asia, Southeast Asia, and North Asia, and also my general observation. So I think my first point is we need to be very clear when we say regulation that we should not paint everything with one brush, as Rami said. What works in Europe need not work in MENA, may not work in Asia, or the regulators may not even want to take that approach. And I'll give an example. In fact, the major growth of fintech in Europe came about because of PSD and then PSD2 regulations. But that can work effectively in Europe because it is a single union. Passporting works, so a single fintech can be, at least before Brexit, could have been set up in London and operate anywhere freely, or it could have been set up in Munich or Berlin and operate in any part of Europe. There is no such equivalent in our part of the world. And while we have Southeast Asian cooperation, ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, it's nowhere as closely integrated as the European Union. So passporting is not available. Therefore, each country, each central bank decides its own policy. So that's the first part of it, that you cannot have a one-size-fits-all. Two, European regulators usually are seen as more stringent, more very, not only customer focused, but they usually are quite top down in their approach. Whereas when I was discussing this with some of my acquaintances and friends in the central banks in this part of the world, I think their approach here is much more collaborative, much more consultative. So they see the role of the central bank as bringing the various participants in the industry, the various banks, the various fintechs, the technology solution providers together, and then letting the industry decide its course of action rather than enforcing something top down. And this I've seen in country after country. The third is we just saw recently Philippines, where I'm currently based, the central bank, the Bank of Central Philippines, BSP, came up with a very interesting open finance framework, which I would encourage everybody to have a look at. And it structures it very well, because again, it's not, open banking is not just one thing. As Dr. Safa very articulately laid out from an academic standpoint, there is the data aspect of it. And then when we say access to data, you have to understand access to what kind of data, what level of access to data. Is it only transaction data? Is it personal information? If so, what happens? How does it coexist or conflict with the privacy laws in those countries? Most countries have very stringent personal data protection acts, etc. So there has to be a very tiered, structured approach that fintechs can access this much data for these kinds of services. Maybe for account opening or video KYC, as Dr. Safa said, they can access some more elements of data. And if they access data, what happens to the right to be forgotten, as we have seen in GDPR in Europe as well. So there is a whole suite of things which comes into play from a regulator's perspective. It's not just as easy as saying, okay, here is the policy and everybody follow it. Most regulators here want the industry to co-own, lead it, create perhaps a public-private partnership, and then the regulator kind of supports it through the right kind of policy framework. Another thing we have seen in this part of the world is, and which was something very interesting, I had invited the Chief Fintech Officer of the Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is usually considered as one of the most progressive regulators in this part of the world, as a guest speaker at one of my lectures. And we asked him the same question about, one of my students asked him about open finance and the view of MAS. And he said something very interesting, that, for us, open banking also has to create, or open finance also has to create a balanced level playing field. So it's not just that, hey, banks, open access to your data. No, it's not like that. If banks open access to the data, so do fintechs. Both of them should enable mutual access to the data. So there can't be one part of the ecosystem which is just receiving data and trying to benefit from it, and another part which is just giving data. There has to be a balance for it to be fruitful and for it to grow. So I think there are various examples like these. And of course, we've seen some very interesting examples in Southeast Asia where regulators have actually taken initiatives to go beyond just framing policy to support and even enable public-private partnerships. That's something I'll share subsequently. But the bottom line here is that when we talk about regulations, yes, regulations are generally quite supportive in this part of the world, but there is no one-size-fits-all.
Yeah, I see it. EU is going pretty fast for that because they actually started it earlier, but the other part of the world is just try to follow them. But I really believe that we are in need of a standardization. So every regulator has to work on it differently, but it also creates more complexity for the banks. So for open banking, regulation is another burden, actually. So what other challenges, what other burdens for open banking do you have any idea, Mr. Rami?
Yes, sure. As you know, any new technology usually comes with its challenges, and mainly the challenges, you can predict these challenges from the pillars for this industry or for this business. So let's start first for the challenges. It will be like separated on three stakeholders: the regulator, the banks themselves, and the external environment where the banks is operating. So on the first level, the regulations. This will be the first and the first challenge level for the open banking, or for the banks to start working with the open banking. As we mentioned previously, me and Malik, you need regulations provide you a general framework which is suitable and matches the requirement and the need and the case of the country you are operating in. And this is a very big challenge because the regulator should be open to sit with all of the stakeholders and to hear for all of them, and finally provide what need from the market. Most of the regulators, unfortunately, maybe in the MENA region, do not work in this way. Like they do some sort of an internal workshop, goes to see a different reference cases from the same region or different regions, and usually take the case or the experience as it is and transfer it to the market, which do not usually work or provide the best practice for the market. So this is the first challenge. The regulator should be open to sit with all of the stakeholders to go with a framework agreed on from all of the stakeholders that this is the way we need to provide the open banking for the country or for the region. On the other hand, and the other level, the challenges on the bank level itself. As we mentioned previously, this is a game-changing trend, the digital transformation. So for the open banking, the challenge on the level of the bank will be, first of all, is the banks from the level of the vision and the mentality are ready to go to the open banking? This is the first challenge because open banking change everything, and it's some sort you need to surrender part of the things you only control as a bank in the traditional way, or the current way handling the business. Giving away the development of the services, which is usually developed inside the bank, the control of the customer data. As Dr. Safa mentioned, the ownership of this data is moving from the bank to the consumer itself, and it could be used from third parties, which was not the case previously. Are you, as a structure, as an organization, are you structured on the right way to handle the open banking, the new way of the operating module inside the bank? This is a challenge. That finally, on the level of the bank, the mentality, the vision, the mission, the goals, the structure of the institution will reflect on the infrastructure, on the back-end systems, on how you provide the technology and the architecture of your infrastructure. The other parts, usually the environment, the external environment, challenges, the readiness of the market for the open banking. Do you have the elements in this environment to help the open banking to success from the outside from the bank and from the regulator? Do you have a mature fintech and third-party environment will add value for the banks to open their data for these third parties and fintech to add value for the consumer journey and for the services and the products will be provided? In MENA region, we have a very big problem that most of the countries is less than 30% bank societies. So this unbanked, it will be a challenge for the bank because you don't have this much huge market to apply the open banking on it. This is a challenge. The final challenge and the last challenge is the ownership of the data and data privacy of the consumer, which will face all of the stakeholders, the regulator, the banks, and the consumer itself. If the consumer will feel okay to share the data with third parties, usually we share only with the central bank and the bank. as a consumer like now, but now my data will be open, how it will be managed, the data privacy and the ownership. And finally, the banks now is opening their data for third party and fintechs. So the security challenges will raise on the table how you will protect your data and your consumer data and the bank data from being breached or used in a bad way, not approved by the regulator and the bank and the consumer itself. These are the challenges, and again, it's different from country to country, from region to region. This needs to be taken into consideration. And thank you for this very important question, Dilek, and thank you, and back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Rami. Yeah, as you mentioned, this is a new way of doing business, so we have to change our minds, we have to change our organization, technical details is also important. Dr. Safa, could you also please comment a few sentences about that topic?
Yes, Mr. Rami has covered most of the points about the challenges for open banking, but I can start from where he stopped about the security risks, which is the major risk for this new field of open banking. Open banking make banks open their application programming interfaces, the APIs, to third-party fintech companies, which comes with security risks. The customers themselves are using open banking applications will now be an entirely new trust relation. There should be a trust relation and they should control who can see their data and who cannot, and which data can be seen or which data cannot be seen. Hackers also can target third-party applications, and excessive access privileges could be given to employees. There are malicious actors will get new opportunities to trick banking customers as well as third-party companies with phishing scams. We all get from time to time like messages, the bank is celebrating 90 years and he will give you some prizes. So click on this link and you will get a prize, which is only a phishing scam that people should take care of it. So open APIs place high demand on security, IT security. There are the challenges also of regulations, as Mr. Malik said, and Mr. Rami also. So regulations and standards are the challenges for the implementation of open banking that require a wide range of complex security functions from the banking sector also. First of all, to open up payments to non-banks and facilitate alternative business models, to promote consumer protection, and to increase pressure on suppliers to create fairer price structures. So the next generation challenger banks and fintechs are creating a new competitive landscape, forcing traditional banks to create new digital services. And if they don't change, they risk to lose their customers challenge to third parties. So these challenges, as Mr. Rami said in his last comment, that if banks don't change the way they handle customers and data, they will start losing to other fintechs and other financial institutions. So the challenges are multi-sectoral, as they said also, and we have to see the challenges for the banks and the customers or consumers and the regulatory authorities themselves. So there are a variety of challenges for this field of open banking.
Thank you. So you two are just mentioning about it's not an easy game. So banks has to take care of data privacy, IT security. They have to think about their organization. They have to change their way of doing business. And the regulation is also a very important point to deal all of these challenges. So Mr. Malik, do you have any good examples from your area for open banking applications?
Thank you for that, Dilek. Yes, I do have some examples that I would like to share, but I was hearing both Dr. Safa and Rami quite intently when they were discussing about challenges, and so many challenges are there. So it's important again to understand that it's not just enough to say, okay, we have 100 APIs or 200 APIs, or you can come and develop on our API portal. It's a completely different way of thinking, as we heard from Dr. Safa and Rami. And I have been a banker like you, Dilek, for 20 years, so I understand, the way we look at revenues, P&L, all of those things have to change. I mean, how do you even decide what is revenue that accrues to you, what goes to the partner who uses their API? There is no playbook or that tells bankers how to operate. So first thing is we need to understand when we look at examples that it's not just enough to set up the infrastructure. I mean, you can set up a great infrastructure and have call developers and fintechs and say, okay, now come on our portal and develop through APIs, but will they use it? And if we see when we talk about open banking, it's modeled on the lines of open marketplaces. I started by giving the difference or a contrast between banking as a supermarket versus banking as a marketplace. And this idea is, really coming from the technology industry, the Android store or the iStore by Apple. This is where these ideas come from, that you can create a marketplace where hundreds or thousands or, hundreds of thousands of developers can come and provide all sorts of excellent services for better customer experience. But how have banks fared so far? So banks in this part of the world, especially Singapore, there are some interesting examples like DBS Bank, for example, which is usually given as an example. It has done quite well. It has over 200 APIs and it has gone into non-traditional areas as well. Even Citi, where I used to work, has close to 200 APIs, and they have modeled some interesting use cases. Like one of the use cases is, when I go to any travel website and when I use my credit card for booking my hotel or my ticket, if it's a Citibank credit card, after I log out of the transaction, instantly it sends me a text message on my phone, registered mobile phone with the bank. So this obviously happens through a third party using API saying, hey, do you want to convert your, so let's say you did a transaction of $1,000 or $1,200. Do you want to convert it into 12 installments of $100 each month and whatever, 9% or 10% interest rate. So that's an interesting example of how customer experience using the 4 F's that I mentioned, faster, frictionless, premium, fun. All of these are encapsulated in an example like this. So there are banks who are doing this. But I also wanted to conclude by giving another example, which is not of any specific bank, but a real public-private partnership. And I briefly spoke about that earlier as well. There is a platform called APIX. I don't know how many of you here might have heard of it. APIX. It stands for API Exchange. And it was jointly set up about 2 or 3 years back. And in fact, today is the last day of the Singapore FinTech Festival, which happened once a year. So about 2 years back, it was announced at the Singapore FinTech Festival. And it's a joint initiative between the Monetary Authority of Singapore, IFC, World Bank, and I think a couple of other agencies, including AFIN, or the ASEAN Financial Innovation Network. So the idea was exactly the same thing that we are discussing on this panel today, that how do you create a platform which is easy to use, which will be more widely used than each bank having its own API? How can you create an industry-wide platform that gives access to multiple players in the industry in a more frictionless, easy manner? And let's remember, not every bank out there is a DBS or a Citibank, which has access to lots of resources and hundreds or thousands of great technology developed. There are many smaller banks, like in the Philippines, where I am right now. It's an island nation of 7,000 plus islands, and so many islands are so remote, you can only reach there by boat. You don't even have a land or there's no airport. So you can only complete the last mile by taking a boat. And there are, of course, banks which are operating those remote areas as well. These banks don't have the kind of resources that large banks in Singapore or Indonesia or Malaysia have. So how do you enable them? And that's how the idea of APIX was born, where it's an industry-wide platform blessed and supported by not just the regulator, but also World Bank, and invested by them. And all these smaller banks can sign up to be a member. It's just, you will have your portal access to your user ID and password. And they also have built a sandbox around that. So you can come, you can play around with it. If you are a solution provider, you can sign up saying, okay, I can offer it to multiple banks. Here is my here are my services, or if you're a small bank, you can sign up and say, I am looking for these services. You don't have to go and set up 200 odd APIs. Now, whether this is a successful model or whether this is a model which conflicts with how banks want to work, as we heard from both Rami and Dr. Safa, only time will tell. But I think this is an interesting model. I am of the personal belief that both models will coexist. Banks, the larger banks, the more cutting edge technology enabled banks like Denise Bank, for example, in your case, they will have their own APIs, but the smaller banks will probably prefer to go through such a network. And this is also a multi-country network. So it allows you to access partners, not just in Singapore, but in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Thailand, in Vietnam, in Cambodia, etc. So that is an example I would like to give. And perhaps there is an opportunity for all of us here to explore if something similar can work in Turkey or in the Caucasus or in the MENA region and can solve for some challenges of financial inclusion, something that we've been talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malik. Yeah, as you mentioned, it's not an easy thing to achieve, open banking, but I want to also give examples, as you mentioned, from Turkey. Turkey is a good condition for that, namely Deniz Bank. Deniz Bank is the number one to provide this API services to the market. They have more than 300 APIs, but they are lucky with their technology that they can put any kind of service as an API to the market, but it's not enough, as you mentioned. Putting APIs is just one part of the game, but the other part is actually to activate the ecosystem. So the fintech ecosystem we have to build to use these APIs to bring innovation with these APIs. Deniz Bank's IT company Intertek is actually building a fintech ecosystem, and there are more than 30 fintechs in Turkey now to contribute to this environment. And I believe this is the way to accelerate the open banking platform, because this fintech has very different know-hows, and they are contributing to this environment with their innovations. So I believe in this region also, they can create value, not just for Turkey, but I believe we have to gather other fintechs from this area, and in this way we can help banks and we can help customers to be more benefiting from open banking. So I want to thank you all for your contribution, dear my guests, and I want to thank all the listeners actually to attend this meeting. It was really a very beneficial discussion. We learned a lot from you. Thank you for your contribution. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you, and have a successful conference. Thank you. Event.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Mobilefest'e de çok teşekkür ediyorum bu güzel panele imkan sağladığı için.
Biz size çok teşekkür ediyoruz ve değerli konuklarımıza. Çok teşekkürler, sağ olun.
Sağ olun.